when it comes to English literature, whether it is in GCSE or A-level, or whether it's just essays in general, typically people find it more difficult to structure and write their essays and plan for their essays in place of actually analysing the language. That seems to be the more capable, easier part of English literature compared to the actual essay writing, which isn't good because at the end of the day, it's the essay that gets you the marks, the points, and it's really the analysing of the language that helps build up your essay. So in this video, I just wanted to sort of just create a help guide for just focusing on the top points in writing an essay. So I've picked a question here. Othello's authority makes him ultimately admirable, and it's just sort of explain this view in the text. You might be given an extract or whatever. Now, there are 5 key points that I have picked out of the AO mark scheme or whatever, which is very similar for every exam board. I picked it out of AQA and so forth, but there's 5 key points that are necessary in writing a well-structured essay. That will put you in band 5. That will put you in the highest band. So I'm just gonna show you brief first points. The first point will be to create a confident argument. And what I mean by that is, you're not saying I believe this. You should stay away from using pronouns. You should more use, for example, it is true that it can be seen here. Perhaps this, just making your point definite and clear, and just showing confidence that you know the text, right? And where best to show this confidence than in the introduction. This is where you create your argument, in the introduction. And I see many people writing probably 1 sentence, 2 sentences max for their introduction, and then they're off. They're talking about literature devices, and in the introduction, that's where you get some marks. You can get some marks from that, from just creating your confident argument. This is part of AO1, I'm pretty sure. This is one of the key points. And AO1, you get the most marks for. Okay, so you've really got to think about how can I create this perfect introduction, and we're going to get into that. So for number 2, we need to think about literary concepts. And by concepts, I do not mean devices. I don't mean metaphors, and so forth. I mean what ideas has Shakespeare used in language to create this appearance of a character, so forth. So I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm gonna come back to that very soon. I just want to cover the rest of the points. So point number 3, we want to think about literary techniques. Literary techniques are very important. And when you begin to start thinking about creating an argument and context and critics, for example, I know in GCSE you don't really need to mention any critics, but in A-level it's very important. When you start thinking about these other things, you stray away from using literary techniques. And note, using literary techniques and quotes will get you marks at the end of the day. It will get you the marks. So number 4 is obviously going to be themes. Themes, for example, love, jealousy, but it's how you structure your essay into introducing the themes. So, for example, you want to follow this order that I'm showing you. First, you want to create your argument in the introduction. Then you want to introduce a concept and explain that concept with the literary techniques used by Shakespeare. And then you can use the literary techniques to flow into how these themes and concepts are made and identified. And then you can back this up with the last tip here, context. Now, typically within themes and the context, this is where we introduce the critic ideas, and so forth. And there is a step 6. Step 6 prevents this thing that teachers love to call waffle. And step 6 is what I call WTWAN. Not going to try and say that as one word, but that means what to write about next. Or WTWN, what to write next. And you have to keep that in mind the entire time while writing this, because this here could be one quote, and you have to just move on. You have to move on in order to reach the time, because you only have an hour to plan and write your essay. So let's go and look at some examples of what I mean here. So I'm going to talk about the introduction last, quite ironically. And first of all, I want to talk about literary concepts. So step 2 here first. Now, I picked up on this quote from Act 1, Scene 1, where Iago and Roderigo are essentially mocking Othello's authority. So I've gone for this quote here. His Moorship ancient. And just quickly, you obviously know, probably, if you've been studying Othello for a while, what we can see from this. Obviously, we can see mockery. And so he's using sort of puns. We've got like we've almost got power dynamic from ancient and so forth because of the age between him and Desdemona. This sort of parallels throughout Act 1, to be honest, with, Old Black Ram, for example. So this is important, but how can we put this into a sentence? Because that's what people don't understand. They just put the quote, and then they say, well, Shakespeare here has used he's used satirical devices and whatnot. But you shouldn't do that. After you've set in your definition and your argument of how Othello's authority sort of presents him as a person, then, I'm just quoting the question here, then you have to ease into the quote you're trying to use. So by doing so, you can get more marks. So I'm going to do this in a different color here, just to mark out what I mean. So first of all, I'm going to identify literary concepts. So we'll go for in derisive tones. You could say satirical, maybe in ironic tones. Iago and Roderigo mock Othello's, and we'll put some blue here. Mock Othello's authority. and I'm just going to put authority in this here, and then we're just going to quote his Morship Ancient. Now, I'm just going to quickly explain to you what I've done here. So, in blue, I've identified where the literary concepts are. By that I mean what Iago and Rodrigo are doing to alter maybe an impression of Othello's authority. So these two come together very nicely right here. In derisive tones, Iago and Rodrigo mock Othello's authority. So we've already explained the quote. So here we're picking up a mark. We're picking up a mark for explaining the quote. Then we've got the quote here, so we're linking to text. Now that's another important point. When you use literary concepts, even if you don't use a quote, make sure you link to text. Authority. And I'm just going to finish this sentence off in, we'll go red pen here. We'll go Iago's pun satirizes the idea that people, I don't know, worship. I'm just gonna, sorry about that. Yeah, that people worship. I'm just putting two little creatures there. Othello, thus challenging his, and we're going to link back to the question, authority. Now, can you see what I've done here? At the start right here, let me just select the white pen. We've used two, and by two I mean literary concepts. So by being able to use explain what literary concepts Shakespeare has used, we're able to explain the linked quotation here. With authority, I'm able to reference the question, and right after the quotation, I've used literary devices. So that's three right here, literary devices. Then I've explained the literary device, which is fine, thus challenging his authority. And I've put authority twice. You might want to use a synonym for authority, but I mean, authority is fine. It just links straight back to the question, which is thus challenging his authority. And maybe you could add on to this sentence saying, I don't know, the fact that Shakespeare uses this sort of critical uses this critical introduction of Iago of the antagonist in place of the protagonist, shows how Shakespeare wants to alter Othello's authority and persona to the audience, right? So that this is definitely an argument against the question. So what do we do next? I'm not just going to end you on this. I'm going to show you two more options. The first option is you compare more language. Now, comparing more language in this, I think, would probably bring you down to band 4 just because you're not fully explaining what you've done at the start. So, but you can do either way. But it's good now to identify a theme with this, and with a theme you can probably link it to another point on the page. So you could say maybe we'll do themes in yellow, and you could say perhaps it is Iago's jealousy. Oh, I cannot spell. Okay. Jealousy of Othello, which gives rise to this mockery. And now we've got part 4. We've got part 4, we've got the theme. And in order to back the theme, there is 2 more possible things we can do. We can, what we should do is back this up with context, or we could use a critic. Now I'm going to back it up with context here because I haven't prepared a critic. But I just want you to realize how each of these different techniques flow into the other. We have got literary concepts flowing into the quote, flowing into the techniques, flowing into the themes, and hence we're able to cover so much of what we want to cover in very little words, which is good if you can write fast and think about a lot of things, because the more you can cover, the more marks you can pick up. So I just want to show you where you could carry on this paragraph. I'm not going to completely write everything here because I also want to include an introduction in this video, and it's getting quite long here. So from here you could possibly link to another act. I'll give you an example here. If you want to go off and write this essay afterwards, would probably be a good idea. Act 2, scene 3. And you could maybe reference his Machiavellianism and how that shows him as sort of a leader, but also it's sort of a counter argument to the one you've already made about his jealousy, which is fine, but maybe you want to back up your point more. And you could reference to the fact that in Act 1, Scene 1, Iago is complaining that Othello had appointed Cassio over himself. And so you could sort of link that jealousy there. And we could also carry on from this irony, right, and introduce the context. So I'm just showing you like 3 possible ways you could go from this. Each way is perfectly fine as long as you're able to introduce context. And I think the best context to work with authority is probably that in the 16th century. In the 16th century, people with army roles in the army, had a high authority and sort of characterized with prestige and honor. And you can see this with, say for example, when the Duke says valiant Othello. Even Cassio says it, valiant Othello. Many people say it. And so you're able to build this paragraph just by flowing. You have to flow. You can't force things out of a quotation. So, for example, you can't just go, I don't know, Iago mocks Othello's authority, his morship, with, and then you're like, morship is ironic because people with army roles in the 16th century had high authority characterized with prestige and honor. You can't just do that. You have to make it flow. You have to introduce it slowly. And by doing so, you get more points. You get more marks. You get a mark. You can notice, okay, well this person has linked some points together about concepts, and then he's linked to a quote, and then he's talked about techniques, and then he's gone into themes, and then he's linked it. Say for example, you parallel with it, or you show some sort of paradox. That's another point. And then you reference in some context.